Hi, welcome to my second lecture on the Caro-Kann defense. I feel bad I had to stop in the middle of analysis of a line, so I'll actually continue that line. But this is the general setup for the Caro-Kann defense. Maybe I'll just back up a few moves. So the Caro-Kann defense starts by e4, c6, d4, and d5. And the most common move, which I'm going to analyze mostly in this lecture, is knight c3. But I was discussing where Black does an exchange and then does the pawn of Bolshevik attack, which continues by capturing the pawns, and then c4. And I'm going through this quickly, but please see my last lecture. And then White continues with knight to f6, knight to c3, and e6, knight to f3, bishop to e7, and then White takes the pawn, and Black takes back with the knight. And I think this is where I left off with my last lecture. So White moves the bishop to d3, basically a basic developing move, and prepares castling. Knight to c6, attacking this pawn here, which is isolated, meaning it can't be defended by surrounding pawns, so it has to be defended by a piece. And basically Black's knight here is actually preventing the pawn from moving. Both sides will castle. White will play a rook to e1, and then Black will now bring the bishop to f6, hitting the pawn again. So White's aim is to sort of attack, build up attack on this pawn. White's going to have to defend it. So let me back up to the main line. So instead of, like I said, we've covered where White moves the advanced variation and where White takes the exchange variation. And now the main move is knight to c3. And I also said in my first lecture that the same move order can be covered in to knight to d2. So let's move the knight to c3, and then the normal thing that happens is Black is basically now compelled to take this pawn. There's really no way to hold on to it, and sort of goes along with our philosophy. We're going to give up this central pawn for more mobility. And then normal moves are pawn takes, and then now knight takes. And now there's three basic continuations for Black. Moving the bishop to here, which is known as the classical variation. Moving to the knight to d7, which is commonly referred to as the Steinitz variation. And then the last one is knight to f6, which is, well, after a couple of moves, actually it's called the Bronstein-Larsen variation. So the most common move, though, is bishop to f5. Let's look at that line. So Black moves the bishop to f5, attacking the knight, and this sequence of moves is almost forced. So now the knight is going to move to g3, where it attacks the bishop, and then the bishop is going to move back. This is fine because really Black plans the exchange off this bishop for peace and play e6 or whatever to get out the bishop. So now White's actually going to play h4, sort of threatening to put the bishop where it can be captured or lose the bishop. Black will play h6, so it can stick its bishop back on h7. White will develop to h3. If you don't know, White has an idea of actually moving the bishop to here, where it can attack this, and then this bishop can, or this knight can actually jump to here and help attack here. Sort of a common idea for White. Black moves bishop to d7, h5, bishop h7, white plays bishop to d3, and then black will exchange off the bishops. That's where we end the classical line. So let's back up and look at the Steinitz variation. The Steinitz variation is where we play knight to d7. What this does is prepares to play knight to f6. So because if we play knight f6 right away, black can disrupt our pawn structure. So then black will play, or I'm sorry, it's white's turn. White will play knight to f3, supporting the pawn and developing a piece. Now black will play the knight to f6, and the black now will just exchange off the knights on f6, and white will play bishop to c4, once again attacking this square here. Now white's just sort of one move, can jump to here and attack. Black will play bishop to f5, like we've seen in other variations. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Whoops, I got off on the variations. Let me pause here and get back to it. Okay, sorry about that. Hit a wrong button and it all got messed up, but this is where we were with playing bishop to f5. Basically, black's going to try to get the bishop over to one of these two squares before it plays e6, so it doesn't trap the bishop. White will castle, then black plays e6, and that's sort of where it ends there. And just to back up and show you a sort of a line in the Steinitz, because I keep saying that one of White's ideas is to attack this pawn with putting the bishop here. So what happens, let's say if we move back to this move, and instead of playing knight to f3, White now plays bishop to f4, sort of right away, looking for a quick attack against this pawn. Just sort of a sub-variation. Well, how play continues, that still black would play the knight out, and then because now if you see, White can move to knight to here, now attacking. This is attack going on. That's what White does. Well, now black just plays e6. Of course, the problem is now this bishop is somewhat trapped. White can play queen e2. Then black will play knight to b6, hitting the bishop. What really is going to happen is that black's going to be able to get rid of this attack. And the first thing is black's going to play this knight to b6. I think the best move is to play bishop to b3, keeping the attack on. And then black will play h6, forcing the knight to go back. And that's sort of the end of that variation. Just want to show you that because of the where I keep repeating the theme of White wanting to play the attack against this f7 pawn right here. So let's back up and cover the last variation. So, well, I guess I backed up a little bit too far because pawn takes, and then I've already covered what happens when black plays the first main move, which is the classical line, bishop to f5. I've also covered when the knight comes to here, which is called the Steinitz defense. But what happens when, and one of the reasons that black moves its knight to here, to d7, was to prepare this knight move. What happens if black just plays it right away? Well, what happens is that white will now just capture the knight. Then you have to ask yourself, well, which pawn should I recapture with? This pawn or this pawn? Well, the Bronstein-Larsen variation captures with this pawn. And there's actually a system, I think there's probably videos on YouTube about this system for black. Unfortunately, I'm out of time, but this is called the Bronstein-Larsen variation. And